She arrived at Ironhold alone. No escort, no carriage, no title left to her name. Just a stolen cloak, a knife in her boot, and the memory of words she was never supposed to hear. She will have nothing left to contest. Spoken behind a wardrobe wall, in the dark, by the very man sent to seal her fate. The contract had been forged. The inheritance, stolen. And the wedding, designed not to unite her with a king, but to erase her entirely. Yet here she stood, bloodied from the mountain pass, facing the one man the conspirators never accounted for. He didn't ask questions first. He didn't reach for documents or demand proof. He looked at the wound on her shoulder and reached for bandages instead. Why would a king, surrounded by enemies and political enemies on every side, choose to protect a woman who arrived with nothing but a dangerous story before he even knew if she was telling the truth? Watch till the end to find out what really happened that night. The wedding dress caught the wind first. Isadora de Valcour stood on the roof of the chapel, one hand braced against the stone parapet, and watched the iron spire carriage roll through the gate below. White linen billowed around her ankles. The fabric was expensive. Her stepmother had made certain of that, and it moved the way beautiful things move when they are about to be ruined. She had known for 48 hours. 48 hours since she'd heard the voices through the wardrobe wall. 48 hours since the shape of the trap became clear. The way a figure emerges from fog, not all at once, but by degrees. First the outline, then the detail, then the terrible specificity of what you are looking at. Below, Sir Aldous Crane stepped down from the carriage. She recognized him. She had seen him only once before, 2 nights ago, through the gap between wardrobe door and frame, but she recognized the way he moved, the deliberate, unhurried quality of a man who had already won. He carried a portfolio of documents under one arm and wore a smile that had nothing to do with warmth. Isadora's hand tightened on the parapet stone. The cold bit through her fingers. He came himself. That was the part she had not expected. Not a proxy. Not a courier. Crane himself, who had stood in the private receiving room and said, in a voice she could still hear if she closed her eyes, "She will have no one left to confirm what she is." She had 40 minutes before the ceremony. She turned from the parapet and walked back toward the chapel door, the white dress a bright wrong thing against the grey November stone. The wardrobe had been a mistake she was grateful for. 2 nights before, she had gone to retrieve her mother's shawl, the one kept folded in the false bottom of the lowest drawer, behind 3 seasons' worth of stored gowns, wrapped in cloth that smelled of dried lavender and cedar. Her mother had been dead since the night Isadora was born. The shawl was a square of grey-green wool, nothing remarkable, worth perhaps 3 coins at market. Isadora had never worn it. She simply needed sometimes to hold it. She had just pulled it free when she heard the voices. The private receiving room shared a wall with the wardrobe. The partition was thin, part of an older construction that predated the manor's renovation. On any normal night, she would have heard only the murmur of a fire, perhaps a servant's footstep. But the voices that night were not keeping themselves quiet. They had no reason to. When the Northern Seal places her name in the bond register, the entirety of Valcourt passes to Lucien under Clause 7. She will have nothing left to contest. Marguerite's voice, dry and precise as always. The king will not know Clause 7 was added after the original was sealed. A man's voice. Careful, unhurried. She had not heard it before. And if she comes here herself? Lucien, slow, tired. A question asked by someone who already knew the answer would not comfort him. A pause. Then, she will have no one left to confirm what she is anymore. Isadora had stood very still in the lavender and cedar dark, the shawl pressed between her palms, and understood. Lucien knew. He had known long enough to be tired of it. And the second voice, the careful, unhurried one? She placed it later when she saw the man step out of the Iron Spire carriage in the grey courtyard, the councillor of the northern hinterlands, the representative of Selim Vorthane's own council. The trap had been placed from both sides. The market town of Dunheim was 2 hours south on foot, less than 1 if she moved without stopping. Isadora changed in the small room adjacent to the stable. One of the grooms was asleep in the loft, and she moved without making a sound, the wedding dress folded and left on a single wooden chair. She kept the riding boots, which were her own and fitted. She took the traveling cloak of her mother's, heavy brown wool, lined with rabbit fur, with the silver devil core clasp at the throat. She immediately turned inward where it would not catch light. The rest she had been preparing for 4 months. 14 silver coins, in a flat purse, sewn into the lining of the cloak. A small knife in the right boot. The memory of every map she had studied of the territory north of Dunheim. The passage through Greystone Pass, the distance to Iron Spire. She went out through the North Grain Gate at the hour when the household was occupied by the arrival of carriage and guests, when every eye was elsewhere, when the courtyard traffic was thick enough to absorb one figure moving against it. She did not look back. The worst thing would have been to look back. The Dunheim Inn announced itself with wood smoke and the smell of wet wool before she saw the light in the doorway. Inside was low-ceilinged warmth, a fire banked high, 3 tables occupied by men eating with the focused economy of people who had been cold for a long time. A woman stood behind the bar, broad-shouldered, hair gone grey and braided tightly, hands that had done 30 years of work without complaint. She looked at Isadora with the measuring glance of someone who categorized strangers for a living, and what she saw made her set down the cup she was drying. White linen hem, barely visible below the brown cloak. Riding boots too fine for a village girl. The kind of composure people wear when composure is the only thing they have left. In or out, the woman said. In Adamnaun, Anihenimani, Sheliel Konant, Adiestadiane. Sit near the fire, don't speak to anyone. Her name was Hedwig. She charged 5 silver for the soup, the bread, a change of clothes and information about the road north. A price that was 3 times fair and included a kind of discretion that could not be purchased separately. She brought the plain linen dress and the thick grey wool overskirt herself, set them down without ceremony, and went back behind her bar. It was when Isadora was pulling the cloak back on, the silver clasp still turned inward, that Hedwig appeared at her elbow, close enough that her next words did not carry past 2 feet. 2 riders from the south came through an hour before you, riding hard toward Bren. Isadora still. They think you ran for the city, Hedwig continued, not looking at her. Marguerite's people, they know the shape of you. She paused. But the man from Iron Spire, Crane, he may already know you'll go north. Why north? Because there's nowhere else to go. And because you're not running away. You're going towards something. The older woman finally looked at her, directly. The pass at Greystone is empty land. No pack, no order. Don't show fear. Don't look away first. And if they stop you, oh. Say my name, Isadora said. Hedwig's expression didn't change, but something in it settled, the way a verdict settles. Yes. In the morning, she left the wedding dress folded on the chair. She worked the silver pin free from the collar of the dress, a violet-shaped brooch that had belonged to her mother, the only thing Marguerite had not thought to take, and pinned it inside her cuff against the skin of her wrist. Cold, dying, small, tiny, entirely hers. The road north narrowed past the last outbuildings of Dunheim and became a track between stands of leafless oak, the ground iron hard with early frost. Isadora walked at a pace she could sustain for hours, not the pace of fear, and kept her eyes on the road ahead rather than the shadows between the trees. Greystone Pass opened between two faces of dark granite 3 hours north of town. The wind came through it like water through a narrowed channel, sharp, directional, smelling of altitude and coming snow. She was 20 steps into the passage when the men stepped out. 3 of them. Not bandits, exactly. The word for what they were was more complicated. The kind of men who existed in the spaces between territories, who acknowledged no lord and answered to no lord except the unwritten one of strength. The one in the middle had a scar that pulled the left side of his mouth permanently upward, into an expression that was not a smile. The youngest kept moving, weight shifting from foot to foot, restless as a dog before a storm. The third stood entirely still. It was the still one she watched. "They smell it," Hedvig had said. "Show fear, and they smell it." Isadora stopped walking. She did not step back. The air in the pass was very cold and very quiet. Her heartbeat was loud in her own ears. She did not permit her breathing to change. She looked at the still one. "I am Isadora de Valcourt," she said. Her voice came out level. She was grateful for that. "I'm traveling to meet Selim Vorthane." She let the name sit there in the cold air. The still man's eyes moved across her face. Not her body, not her cloak, her face. He was measuring something, the way experienced fighters measure an opponent before deciding whether the cost of engagement is worth the outcome. "If you want to verify that," she said, "his border patrol comes through this pass twice a day." 3 seconds. 4, dying. The still man stepped sideways, off the path. The scarred one stared at her for a moment longer, something speculative and not entirely friendly in his expression, and then followed. The youngest was already moving away, attention already elsewhere, done with the calculation. One time, the scarred one said, not looking back. Isadora walked through. She did not hurry. She kept her steps even, and her spine straight until the pass was behind her, and the track opened onto the long slope of the northern valley. And then she stopped, put her hand against the nearest oak, and waited for her legs to stop being made of water. The shaking came then, and she let it come, and when it was done she kept walking. She heard the cart before she saw it, the creak of an axle, the slow clop of 2 heavy horses, a shape resolving out of the afternoon grey into a canvas-covered wagon loaded with wool bales. The driver was a large man with a red beard and the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors by choice. He pulled the horses up when he saw her on the road. She had not flagged him down. "Ironhold," he said, "before dark, if the road holds." She looked at him. "I've been in worse places than Greystone," he said. "I know the look of someone who just came through. Get up." She got up. There was room in the front beside him, and the wool bales behind were dense enough to break the wind. He gave her a piece of hard cheese from his coat pocket and asked her nothing. His name was Bastian. He traded in dyed wool between the southern towns and the northern holds, a route he had run for 15 years, which meant he knew every guard post and shortcut and dangerous stretch of road between here and the mountains. He talked about the wool trade with the comfortable expansiveness of a man who had found his purpose and was at peace with it. She listened. The rhythm of the cart was slow and even, the horses unhurried. The sky above the tree line was turning the particular deep gray that comes before snow. "Why," she said, when there was a gap in the talk about wool prices, "why stop?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the road. Someone stopped for me once, long time ago. Different road, different kind of trouble. He shrugged, a movement that involved most of his upper body. It costs me nothing. She looked at the road ahead. The first flakes of snow were beginning to fall. For the first time since the wardrobe, she closed her eyes and let her body understand. She was still alive, and she was moving north, and the trap was behind her. That was enough. For now, it was enough. The gates of Ironhold rose from the valley floor, like something the mountain itself had decided to grow. Black granite walls, a gatehouse with torches already lit against the early dark. The track approaching it lined with bare-branched trees, whose upper limbs were laced with ice. The cart stopped at the outer post, where two guards in grey wool cloaks stood with the particular stillness of men who expected to be obeyed. Isadora climbed down before they could ask. "Isadora de Valcourt," she said. "I need to speak with the commander of your gate watch." One of the guards looked at the wool cart, then at her, then back at the wool cart, with the expression of a man whose morning had been considerably less complicated than his afternoon was becoming. The man who came out of the gatehouse was not who she expected. He was perhaps 35, with close-cropped auburn hair and a scar on the right side of his jaw that pulled the skin tight when he turned to look at her. He carried himself like someone who had been in enough dangerous situations to have stopped being impressed by them. His eyes were quick and careful, and they assessed her in 3 seconds with the thoroughness of a man whose job was to make those 3 seconds count. "Lady de Valcourt," he said. "Not a question. You were expected 3 days ago, with an escort." "I changed my arrangements." His gaze dropped briefly to the wool cart behind her, already trundling away. "Alone. Through Greystone Pass." "Yes." He was silent for a moment. Not the silence of disbelief, she thought. The silence of recalibration, of a man filing away a new piece of information and deciding where it changed his existing picture. "I'm Brennan Holt. I command the gate watch." He stepped back and gestured toward the inner courtyard. "Come through. The king will want one." "I also need to tell you that Aldous Crane should not be permitted to contact anyone outside these walls until I've spoken to someone in authority." Brennan Holt went very still. "That," he said slowly, "is a serious thing to say about a man of the council." "I know." They looked at each other for a moment. She could feel the weight of the calculation behind his eyes, who she was, what she was claiming, how much of it was likely to be worth the disruption it would cause. "Come through," he said again, but something in his voice had shifted. She followed him into Ironhold. The inner courtyard opened to the left of the gatehouse, into a space larger than it appeared from outside. Stables along one wall, a well at the center, and beyond that, the main keep, dark stone faced with a wooden gallery that ran its upper length. The sound of the place was the sound of a working fortress, horses, metal, the rhythm of ordered activity. And in the center of the training yard, the sound of a sword. Not sparring. The cadence was wrong for sparring, too even, too continuous. The sound of someone working alone, through repetitions with a concentration that turned exercise into something closer to argument. The blade caught the torchlight in a steady arc, and the man holding it moved in a way that made the word practiced seem insufficient. Isadora stopped walking. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not the impressive height of men who wished to appear tall, but the kind that came with a breadth of shoulder and a proportion of limb that made it simply a fact about the world, like the height of the wall behind him. His clothing was plain, a linen shirt, dark with sweat at the collar and shoulders, tucked into working trousers. No armor. No insignia. His hair was black and cut short at the sides, long enough on top to show the disorder of exertion. When he turned to complete the arc of the blade, she saw his face. A jaw that could have been cut from the same granite as the walls. A mouth held in a straight, considered line. A scar that ran from the left corner of his jaw, down along the bone to his chin. Not recent, healed smooth and silver, the kind of mark a man eventually stops noticing, because it has become part of the face he recognizes in water. His eyes, when they found her, were grey. Not a warm grey. The color of iron that has been left in cold air, of overcast sky in winter, of stone beneath river water. They fixed on her the way precise things fix on what they are measuring. He stopped. Not with the self-consciousness of someone caught off guard. The word for how he stopped was concluded, as if the motion had simply reached its natural end. He set the point of the sword against the ground and looked at her. Brennan, half a step behind Isadora, began, "My Lord Wern. I know who she is." The voice was low, not loud, the kind of voice that does not need volume, because the room, or the courtyard, or whatever space contains it, simply becomes quieter around it. He walked toward her. Not quickly, not slowly. The pace of a man crossing his own ground. The distance between them went from 20 steps to 10 to 5, and she kept her chin level and her hands still at her sides, because there was something in the directness of his approach that made a kind of stillness feel necessary, like standing steady before something large and moving. He stopped 5 feet from her. His eyes, grey, iron-cold and entirely focused, moved over her face the way she had seen him move with the sword, looking for what was actually there, not what should be there. "You came by wool cart," he said. "Yes." "Through Greystone." "Yes." A beat. 2 beats. His gaze dropped to her shoulder, the left one, and something in his expression changed by a degree so small, she almost missed it. Not softness, exactly, a narrowing of attention. "Are you hurt?" The question landed in a place she had not prepared. She had rehearsed any number of things she might need to say in this courtyard. Legal arguments, the sequence of events at Valcourt Manor, a careful enumeration of what she had heard and what it implied. She had not prepared for that. She looked down at her shoulder. The linen of the new blouse had pulled against something during the climb into the cart, and the rock cut she'd taken on the pass, a scramble against granite, when the still man had stepped toward her before stepping back, had opened a seam in the fabric and marked it rust brown. "My shoulder, the pass, it's not raw. Come with me. I need to speak with you about Aldous Crane." "I know." He had already turned. Shoulder first. Then Crane. She looked at his retreating back for a moment. The courtyard was quiet around them, Brennan several feet away, the guards at their posts, the torches burning. She thought about the 20 different ways she had imagined this meeting in the 2 days of walking and cart riding that had preceded it, and how none of them had included this. She followed him. The room off the training yard was small, a guard room really, with a single table, a bench, a shelf of basic supply, 1 torch on the wall. It smelled of iron and leather, and the cold that comes through stone walls, no matter how thick they are. He closed the door. The space became immediately smaller. Not threateningly, she noted this, but with the particular intimacy of 2 people occupying a room sized for one purpose when they are there for another. He went to the shelf without ceremony, took down a wooden box worn smooth with use, and set it on the table. Then he pulled the low chair out and looked at her. "Sit, you want." She sat. He set the small chair across from her, close enough to work. When he sat down, they were at the same level, and she found herself aware of details she had not catalogued at 5 feet. the faint line of another scar along his left forearm, longer and older than the one on his jaw. The particular quality of his hands, large, capable, the knuckles of the right hand carrying the small, flat scars of long practice with a blade. "The left shoulder," he said. "I'll need to see it." She pulled the collar of the blouse down past the shoulder seam. "Not much. Enough." The wound was a clean scrape, 4 fingers long, the skin raised and dark at the edges, beginning to crust. Not serious. Unpleasant. He leaned forward to examine it. Close enough that she could smell sweat and cold iron and something under both of those. Wood smoke, she thought, faint as though it had been in the fabric for weeks. He did not react to the wound with the hissed intake of breath that people use to indicate both sympathy and the pleasure of being the one who gets to have sympathy. He simply looked at it, and she thought again of the sword in the courtyard. The same quality of attention, precise and without performance. He reached into the box and took out a cloth and a small vial of clear liquid. When he pressed the cloth, dampened, against the wound, it stung with a specificity that made her jaw tighten. He noticed. He did not comment. He continued working with the same even pressure. "Crane," he said. Not a question. An opening. He was in the private receiving room at Valcourt Manor 3 nights before the ceremony. She kept her voice level, which was easier to do when she was not looking at his face. "I was in the adjoining wardrobe. The wall between them is thin." She paused. "I heard him say that the king would not know clause 7 had been added after the original contract was sealed. I heard my brother confirm that if I arrived here, I would have no one to verify my identity." His hands did not stop. 12 years, he said after a moment. "Crane has been on the council." "I know. I'm telling you what I heard." Now he was rapping. The cloth came from the box already cut into strips. Someone had prepared this room against the ordinary injuries of a training yard, and she thought briefly about what it meant, that a man who ran 5 territories kept his own first aid kit in a cold room off the practice yard, rather than sending for a physician. He worked in silence for a moment. Each rap was even, not too tight, not loose enough to slip. His thumb passed across the knot at the end to secure it, and paused. She became aware, with a clarity she had not been expecting, of the warmth of his hands through the cloth. The stone walls held cold. The torch was small. His hands were the temperature of someone alive and working, and the contrast was more noticeable than it should have been. He looked up. At this distance, the gray of his eyes was not simple. There were gradations in it, lighter near the center, darker at the rim, the way ice is not one color but several layers of the same color seen at different depths. "You believe I'm telling the truth," she said. It came out more directly than she intended, less a statement, more a test. "I believe it's worth investigating," he said. "That is a different thing." "Yes." She held his gaze. "But you rapped the shoulder before you asked the questions." Something shifted in his expression. Very small. The line of his mouth did not change, but something around his eyes did. A quality of attention that was different from the medical attention of a moment ago, and different again from the evaluating look in the courtyard. "Crane will be isolated from outside contact today," he said. "His room, his meals, no correspondence leaving these walls, not arrested, held. That is what a 12-year member of my council receives while I determine whether what I've been told is credible." A pause, the weight of something behind it. "It is also what I can do before I have evidence." She looked at the wrapped shoulder. The bandage was already absorbing a small dark spot at the center. The wound was not serious, but it was not done bleeding. "Thank you," she said. He stood, replacing a cloth and vial in the box with the same economy of motion he applied to everything. He did not say "you're welcome" or "it's nothing" or any of the other things that would have made the moment smaller. He said, "Mireille will take you to the East Tower. Someone will have lit the fire before you arrive." She gathered her cloak and stood. Her shoulder ached with the clean, purposeful ache of a wound that had been properly seen to. "I don't know yet if I can trust you," she said. He turned from the shelf to look at her. "No," he agreed. "You don't." "That's an honest answer." "It's the only kind worth giving." She left the room before the silence could become something she would need to name. Mireille was 20, Gascon by accent, and moved through the stone corridors of Ironhold with the speed and confidence of someone who had memorized every turn in her first week and spent the subsequent months optimizing. She talked continuously and efficiently, the way some people hum, not for an audience, but because silence made them uncomfortable. The East Tower is warmer than it seems. The stone is double-layered on the north face. Lord Vorthane had it redone 3 winters ago after the old winter was particularly unpleasant for the household. The library is on the 2nd floor of the main keep, past the guardroom. Father Emmerich is there most mornings. He keeps records, all the records, 40 years of them. If you need to find something about documents that came through this hole. "I'd rather not," Isadora said. "I thought so. I'll bring it." The fire in the East Tower room was, as promised, already lit. The room was plain. A bed with heavy blankets, a table, a window facing east that showed nothing but dark mountain and the first stars appearing in the strip of sky between peaks. Someone had put a pitcher of water on the table and a cup beside it. Isadora sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the fire and thought about what she knew. Crane was isolated. That was Selim Vorthane acting on her word before he had any evidence beyond her word, and she understood what that cost him. A man with political enemies does not move against his own counsel without calculation, without risk. He had done it anyway, before he asked the questions, before he determined credibility. He rapped the shoulder first. She was aware of the thought, and she was aware of being aware of it, and she did not pursue it further. She put it in the part of her mind where she kept things she was not yet ready to examine. She had work to do. Father Emmerich occupied a corner of the library that smelled more like him than any other part of the room. Ink and parchment, and the particular dry smell of very old paper that has been handled by careful hands. He was 70, perhaps, with the economical frame of a man who had never eaten more than he needed and had stopped growing taller precisely when his skeleton achieved its structural requirement. He wore round spectacles that had been repaired with wire at one temple, and his fingers were permanently stained dark at the tip. He did not look up when she came in. "I know who you are," he said to the document he was reading. "Mireille told me." "Then you know why I'm here." "I know why you think you're here, which may or may not be the same as why you are here." He turned a page. "Sit down. You're taller than I expected, and you're blocking my light." She sat. The original contract between Lord Edmond de Valcourt's estate and this hold was processed 8 months ago, she said. "I believe it was altered after it was sealed. I need to find the original copy." He looked up for the first time. His eyes behind the wire-repaired spectacles were the pale, sharp blue of old age, the kind of blue that has faded past prettiness and arrived at clarity. "You believe," he said, "or you know." "I know what I heard. I believe the document will confirm it." "The difference matters." "Yes, that's why I'm here instead of standing in the Great Hall making claims." Something shifted in his expression, not warmly, but in the way a mechanism shifts when the right key turns the right tumbler. I keep copies, he said. Everything that enters this hold. 40 years. No one has ever asked me why. A pause. No one has ever asked me for anything, actually. This place is very secure. Everyone assumes the security is enough. He stood, moving toward the shelves with the unerring navigation of a man who has organized his own world and committed it to memory. Give me until tomorrow morning. She spent the rest of the day reading, not the copy of the contract. That was with Emmerich. She read the bound volumes of Northern law that lined the east wall of the library, the property statutes and the mating bond regulations, cross-referenced and annotated in a dozen different hands across a dozen different centuries. She took notes in the small book she had brought from Valcourt Manor in the lining of her cloak. The habit of a woman who had been taught young that paper remembers what minds forget. She found what she needed on the third hour. A bond formed under coercion, defined as the absence of informed, unforced consent by any party named in the contract, is voidable at the request of the coerced party, provided evidence of coercion is presented to a recognized judicial body within 60 days of execution. She read it twice, 3 times. Provided evidence. She kept reading. He came in at mid-afternoon. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps exactly, but a change in the quality of the silence, the kind of subtle shift that announces a particular presence rather than a generic one. She looked up from her notes. Salem Vortan stood in the library doorway, in working clothes, a plain dark tunic, no sword, hair showing the slight disorder of someone who had been moving through a day rather than staging an appearance. He held nothing. He looked around the room with the brief inventory glance of a man checking his own space, and then his eyes found her at the table, surrounded by open volumes and annotated pages, and he came in. He sat at the far end of the table without asking. He picked up one of the books she'd set aside, not the one she was using, one of the finished ones, and began to read. She watched him for exactly 3 seconds before returning to her notes. 40 minutes passed. The fire in the hearth worked steadily. Outside, the light shifted from the sharp white of winter afternoon toward the softer gray of early evening. She was aware, in the way she was aware of the fire and the light and the cold press of the stone wall behind her, of the specific fact of him at the other end of the table, the slight movement of a page turning, the quality of the quiet around. Her candle guttered. Not from wind. The room had no draught. The wick had simply reached the end of its own capacity, and the flame shrank, brightened briefly with false hope, and went out. She reached for the candle in her candle holder and found only warm wax. He stood before she had finished the thought of standing herself. He went to the shelf along the far wall, took a new candle from the supply kept there, brought it to the table, and lit it from the torch bracket beside the door. He set it on the table in front of her notes. He sat back down. He did not say anything. She looked at the new flame for a long moment, steady, sufficient, without drama, and then picked up her pen and continued writing. Something small had happened in the room, and she was not yet ready to call it by its name. That evening, Mireille brought 2 portions of supper without being asked. Salem arrived 10 minutes after the food, again without ceremony, and sat across from her in the chair that now seemed, by some process of repetition, to be his. He ate with the same focused efficiency she was beginning to associate with everything he did, and when she asked him, for the first time, a direct question about himself, he answered it. "You lost your father and brother in the same year," she said, "before you took the throne." "Yes." "How old were you?" 28. She looked at him. The firelight from the hearth reached this far without being dramatic about it. a warm orange at the edges of the shadow. In this light, the scar along his jaw was less visible, and the lines around his eyes, not deep but present, looked like what they were, the marks of sustained vigilance, not years. "My father died when I was 16, she said. She had not planned to say this. He was a scholar. He liked maps. When he talked, which wasn't often, it was always worth listening to. He was watching her in the way she'd noticed he had of watching people, not staring, not politely looking while waiting, but listening with his eyes, the way people listen who take information seriously. "What happened to his estate?" he said. "Marguerite held it in trust for Lucien, for 4 years while I watched." She set her fork down. He would not have left it that way. He was careful about things like that, about leaving people with what they needed. The contract came through him. Through his name. He'd been dead for 2 years when it was filed. He was still for a moment. Then, "The council should have verified more carefully before placing any name on a contract without that person's explicit consent. That is a failure I can account for." She looked at him. The direct acknowledgement of it, no deflection, no redirection to Crane or to Marguerite, sat strangely in the air. She was not accustomed to people in positions of power accounting for their failures in the present tense, without audience, across a table with food on it. "What do you actually need from this?" she said. "Not the political answer, the real one." He looked at his hands, then at her, and she thought she saw something pass through his expression that was more human than the rest of his face, less the architecture of authority, more the fact of a man who had been carrying weight for a long time and had stopped expecting anyone to ask about it. 6 years without a Luna," he said. "The council uses it. Every decision I make, every territory dispute, every winter negotiation. There is always someone at the table who is waiting for me to fail, and the absence of a mate is the shape of that failure they keep pointing to." He paused. "I need someone who can stand in a room full of those people and not need me to stand between them and her." "You need someone capable and willing," she said. "Yes. Those are the criteria." Not, she searched for the word, not a seal on a contract, not a name in a ledger. "No, then." His voice was quiet. "Never that." "Then you understand," she said, "why I have a problem with how I arrived here." "I understand," he said, "why it would make you trust nothing about this place. Or anyone in it." A pause. Very brief. "Or anyone in it," he agreed. She picked up her fork again. He returned to his meal. Outside the library window, the snow that had been threatening all day was finally coming down, slowly, without urgency, covering the courtyard in the patient grey-white of northern winter. She appeared on the 3rd morning. Isadora heard her before she saw her. The distinctive click of heeled boots on stone corridor, a sound that existed in a different register than the soft-soled functional footstep of everyone else in Ironhope. Then, the library door opened, and Lady Seraphine Voss came in. She was beautiful in the way some women are beautiful, completely and without accident, the kind of beauty that was the result of very good luck applied with careful attention. Red hair, green eyes, a jaw that belonged on a Roman coin. She wore a riding dress in forest green that had been made by someone who understood both fine fabric and the human form, and she moved through the room as though every room she entered had been waiting for her arrival. She looked at Isadora with an expression of polished assessment that was so well controlled it gave almost nothing away. "You're the Dovercourt girl," she said. Not unkindly. Precisely. "I am Isadora de Valcourt," Isadora said. "Of course." Seraphine sat, not in the chair across from Isadora, but in the armchair beside the fire, which positioned her as neither supplicant nor opponent, simply a woman settling into her own space. I've heard the outline of what happened. Remarkable journey. Thank you. I mean it as a fact, not a compliment. She studied her own hands for a moment, then looked up. I should tell you something. The council put my name forward for this position before they found yours. I am saying this not to threaten you, but because I believe you should have the information. Isadora set down her pen. Why? Because I would want to know. And because, a slight pause, this hold is small, and we will be here together for some time. And I'd rather we understand each other clearly than manage each other delicately. She could see what Seraphine was. Sharp, composed, experienced in the particular art of positioning. Someone who had been navigating the politics of the northern nobility since she was old enough to understand that her beauty was an asset that required management. Salem Fortin does not make decisions based on contracts, Seraphine said, standing. She moved toward the door, the same unhurried certainty she'd entered with. In case that is a slight word search, relevant to your thinking. She left. Isadora sat for a long moment after the heeled footsteps faded. Then she became aware of something she had been keeping in the back corner of her mind for 3 days. The way you keep a candle flame cupped between your palms in the wind. Something she had not permitted herself to examine directly. She examined it now. She wanted to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Not because the legal case required her presence. She wanted to stay in this cold stone hold with its gray-eyed king, who lit her candle without comment and answered her questions without performance. And the wanting of it was uncomfortable in the specific way of desires that outpaced permission. She picked up her pen and returned to her notes. The thickest wall at Ironhold had listening rooms built into it, small alcoves behind wooden panels used in older centuries for the specific kind of intelligence gathering that went by the name of statecraft. Brennan Holt brought Isadora to the one adjacent to the lower interrogation room, late in the afternoon of the 4th day. You're the only person who heard his voice in that room, he said, with the flat tone of a man who had not wanted to say this, but had been persuaded by logic. If he confirms anything under questioning that matches what you reported, your testimony becomes the corroborating frame. Through the gap in the wooden panel she listened. Crane sat at the interrogation table looking, for the first time, like a man whose careful composure had met its limit. Not broken, but strained. He had the expression of someone recalculating in real time, reevaluating which information it would cost more to hold on to. Salem Fortin sat across from him. She could see his profile, the line of his jaw, the flat patience of his expression. He was not threatening. He was not angry. He was simply waiting, with the quality of a man for whom waiting was simply another form of work. You met with Countess Marguerite de Valcourt, he said, 6 months ago, in her private receiving room at the manor. There may have been a social occasion. You did not report the meeting to the council. Crane was quiet. That is a violation of council duty, Salem said. Not a crime, but a violation. Do you understand what I'm asking you to confirm? A long pause. Yes. The word came out with the particular weight of a man setting something heavy down. I met with her. I should have reported it. I did not. Isadora closed her eyes for a moment. Not triumph, something more complicated. The satisfaction of being correct without the pleasure of it, because being correct about this meant everything she had run from was real, not a misunderstanding, not fear overriding judgment. That's enough, Brennan said quietly behind her. You can step back. She stepped back from the panel. In the dim light of the listening alcove, she looked at her own hands. He didn't confirm the content of what was said, she said. He confirmed the meeting. He confirmed he didn't report it. Brennan's voice was neutral, careful. That's enough to unseal the contract and demand an audit. She looked at him. In the 3 days since she'd arrived, she had become accustomed to the specific quality of Brennan Holt's skepticism. It was not hostile, she had decided. It was the skepticism of a man who had been wrong about people before and had adopted wariness as a tool rather than a temperament. You still don't know if I'm telling the truth, she said. About the rest of it? No. He met her gaze. But if the documents show what you say they'll show, it won't matter anymore whether I believe you. The paper will. And if they don't? He was quiet for a moment. Then we'll have a different conversation. She thought that was probably the most honest answer he could have given. Mireia arrived at Isadora's door at the 4th night's midnight, with the expression of someone who had been running and was trying not to look like it. Riders from the south, she said. You're the young Lord de Valcourt, and 2 others. They're at the outer gate. The great hall of Ironhold was lit for a formal reception in the middle of the night, which was the kind of contradiction that only made sense in a place designed around the constant possibility of the unexpected. Torches in all the brackets. The fire in the main hearth built up high. The household guard at the 4 corners. Salem Vortain stood before the dais, not on it, not seated, but in front of it. He wore the formal grey wool of state, the de Vortain emblem at his shoulder, and he looked like what he was. A man who had not slept and did not show it, who had dressed in the time available, and had made the choice to be fully what his position required before his guests arrived. He did not sit. Seraphine Voss stood near the north wall, far enough from the center to be a witness and close enough to be a presence. She had not been summoned. She had simply appeared, which Isadora, entering from the side passage with Mireille, noted without comment. Lucien de Valcourt came in through the main doors. He was taller than Isadora had remembered, or she had been smaller the last time she stood in a room with him. He had their father's coloring, the dark hair and the particular brown of his eyes, but the resemblance ended there. The jaw was Marguerite's, sharper, more constructed. He was 18 and looked it. The specific youth of someone who had been told for years that he would grow into authority and was still waiting for the growing to finish. Behind him came 2 men in Valcourt livery, and behind them, with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who was not surprised by anything in this room, walked no one. Marguerite had sent her stepson to collect her stepdaughter. She had not come herself. Isa, Lucien said, and his voice when he said her name was the most honest sound in the room. The relief in it uncalculated, the use of the diminutive a reflex he had not managed to suppress. Thank God, you're... Don't. He stopped. She walked into the center of the hall. Not quickly, not performing. She walked the way she had walked through Greystone Pass, like someone who had already done the hard part and was simply arriving at its consequence. I left Valcourt Manor on my wedding morning, she said. The hall was large enough that her voice needed to carry, and it did. I left because I understood what had been arranged for me. I would like to explain what I mean. And she did. She told it clearly, the wardrobe, the voices, Crane's presence at the planning of her diminishment, Clause 7, the 12 silver creditor that existed in no registry. She recited what she had heard with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing it in her own mind for 4 days, not to improve it, but to confirm it, to make sure the sequence held, that the details did not slip. She had not planned to recite the specific words, but when she reached that part, she found they were still there, word for word, as clean as the moment she'd heard them. When the Northern Seal places her name in the bond register, she will have nothing left to contest. Those words were spoken in the receiving room at Valcourt Manor by a man I know to be Aldous Crane, in the presence of my stepmother and my brother. She looked at Lucien. He was looking at his own hands. He held them slightly open in his lap, and she thought he looked like someone sitting with a loss he had not been willing to name until someone named it for them. "Did I understand correctly what I heard?" she said, not harshly, asking. He looked up. His eyes were wet at the corners. Not crying, the precursor to crying, the place before the decision. "Yes," he said. One word, and it cost him something she could see. Selim Vortan spoke for the first time since the hall had filled. His voice was the same as it had been in the courtyard, in the guard room, across the library table, low, even carrying to every corner without effort. "Sir Brennan, send riders to St. Emeric Cathedral at Valcourt. I want Lord Edmund de Valcourt's original will, the church copy, not the civil record, and every financial document relating to the estate for the past 10 years. Full inventory." He paused. "Lord Lucien de Valcourt will remain in the guest quarters as my honoured guest. The men who accompanied him will remain in the outer hall without weapons. They will be fed and housed." One of the two Valcourt men took a half-step forward. Selim looked at him. He did not take the full step. "This hall is dismissed," Selim said. As the room began to empty, Seraphine moved past Isadora toward the door. She did not stop, but she met Isadora's eyes for one moment, and the small movement of her head, barely a nod, barely anything, carried in it something that was not quite respect and not quite acknowledgement, and was somewhere between both. Isadora held it in mind as she walked back to the East Tower. Outside, the snow had stopped. The courtyard was white and still and very cold, and the stars had returned to the strip of sky between the mountain peaks, sharp and particular and impossibly numerous in the way they only appeared at altitude. She closed the door of her room and sat beside the fire and thought about Lucien's face when he said yes. One word. She had not known, until he said it, how much she had needed to hear it. The fire had burned down to coals when she gave up on sleep. She sat at the window for a while, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the white courtyard below. The moon had moved to the west, and its light came down at a low angle, cutting shadows from every unevenness in the snow. Each cobblestone had its own small, dark twin, each gatehouse merle in its own shape. She thought about Lucien. He had not built the trap. He had stood in it, been shaped by it, learned to be small enough to fit inside it without complaint. 7 years she had watched him from the other side of the same household, each of them learning a different version of how to survive in a space that did not want them. He had chosen comfort. She had chosen awareness. Neither choice was brave. Only one of them had kept her alive. "You're not angry," she told herself, and found it was nearly true. What she felt was closer to a kind of grief, the grief of a different version of things that could not be recovered now. She put on her cloak and went into the corridor. The corridor outside the East Tower rooms was lit by 2 torches set in brackets at either end, giving the middle stretch a comfortable darkness. The wall to her left had a long, narrow window, a defensive slit, too small for a man to pass through, perfectly sized to frame a column of night sky. She went to it, leaned her shoulder against the cool stone, and breathed. Not sleeping. She turned. He was standing near the water basin at the corridor's end, the one that was replenished each evening from the well, a practical medieval accommodation for the middle-of-the-night thirst that came with altitude and cold. He was not in state clothes, not in armor. A dark linen shirt, working trousers, feet bare on the stone. His hair had the look of someone who had been lying down and then wasn't. She noted, in a particular part of her awareness that she was trying not to acknowledge, the bare forearms, the shirt unlaced at the collar, the fact of him in a corridor at midnight as simply a man, and not a title. "How long have you been standing there?" she said. "Not long." She turned back to the window. After a moment, she heard him move, not toward the basin, past it, and then the particular sound of someone settling against the wall. When she looked, he had his back against the stone opposite her, arms loose at his sides, looking down the corridor rather than at her. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. The stone was cold through the wool of her cloak, cold in a way that became less noticeable after the first minutes. He sat down across from her, back against his own wall. The distance between them was the width of the corridor. In the low torchlight, the shadows were kind. The scar on his jaw was barely visible, and the lines around his eyes that she had catalogued, the ones that came from vigilance, were softened. The silence was the kind she had almost forgotten existed. Not silence held by restraint, not silence managed to avoid saying the wrong thing, but silence that had simply arrived between two people and been decided to be sufficient. "What frightens you?" she said. The question came out without the hesitation she would have applied to it in daylight. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, considering. "Every decision," he said. "Every morning. The question of whether the thing I decided yesterday was the right thing, and the knowledge that I will not know the answer for years." "You don't mean for yourself?" "No. What?" A pause. "The territories, the people in them, the decisions I make about their lives, what to trade away, what to defend, who to trust with authority over them." He looked at the ceiling briefly. "I have not yet made a decision that I knew for certain was right. I have made some that turned out to be right. The difference between those two things is larger than people outside this work assume." She looked at him. He was 28 when he took this hold. His father and brother in the same year, both to the border war, both in the 6 months before the peace was signed. He had not had years to come to this gradually. It had arrived all at once, the weight of it, the specific weight of a position that does not allow you to simply sit with the grief before requiring you to rule. "My father," she said, and she had not planned this. It came out the way the things that matter come out, in the dark, in the horizontal hour, when the usual defenses are sleeping. "He died when I was 16. He was not a remarkable man in any obvious way. He liked maps. He was quiet. When he talked, it was worth stopping for. And when he died..." She stopped, started again. "I lived for 7 years in that house, after, and the worst thing was not anything Marguerite did. The worst thing was learning to exist so quietly that no one had to acknowledge me, to take up so little space that my presence became optional." He said nothing. He was looking at her with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, complete and without performance. "I stopped remembering what it felt like," she said, "to be in a room where someone actually looked at me." "Tatoi koisian." The words came in the old language before she could register the shift. Then, in the northern French that was their shared tongue, "I see you." 3 words. They landed somewhere below her sternum, in the soft place that had not been touched in 7 years, and she felt it, not warmly, not comfortably, but like the return of sensation to a numb limb, with a kind of pain before the warmth. She looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching from it, and she thought, here is a man who means what he says, not because he's performing honesty, but because performance is a thing he has not bothered to learn. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "Not anymore." "I know. But I was afraid of what you represented. the contract, the shape of it, another house where I existed by permission. And now. She looked at her own hands in the torchlight, at the small silver pin against her wrist, the violet-shaped brooch from the wedding dress she had left behind. Now I'm afraid of something else, she said. He did not ask what. She did not say. They sat in the cold corridor with the width of the passage between them, and the silence came back, and it was a different silence now. It had a texture and a weight that the first one had not had, and she was aware of it the way she was aware of the cold of the stone and the warmth of the torchlight through her entire body at once. She did not sleep for a long time after she returned to her room. Father Emmerich came to her door at first light. He did not knock so much as tap, twice, precisely, with one knuckle, the tap of a man who had decided on the appropriate level of urgency for the situation and executed it, without excess. "Come in," she said, though she was already standing. He entered holding a leather-bound volume, not a volume on closer inspection, but a folio of loose documents gathered between two boards and tied with cord. He set it on the table and untied it with the focused care of someone handling things that had taken 40 years to accumulate. 3 sections, he said. Here, here, and here. He pointed to 3 places in the middle of the document stack. The original contract was sealed 8 months ago. These 3 sections, here, here, and here, were added after sealing. The ink is a different composition, under this. From his coat pocket he produced a magnifying lens. The baseline has faded differently, 1 season's difference, approximately. She looked through the lens. The variance was small but unmistakable. The ink in those 3 sections carried a slightly warmer tone, a very slightly different spread at the edges of each letter, the quality of ink applied to parchment that had already contracted and lost its initial porosity. It was not immediately visible to the naked eye. To Father Emmerich, after 40 years of handling documents, it was apparently quite visible. Clause 7, she said. And the creditor clause, and the clause regarding transfer of property in the event of the female party's failure to complete the bond. He replaced the documents with the same care he'd shown in removing them. I would testify to this before any court in the Northern Territories. A pause. I have not been asked to testify to anything in 40 years. I find I'm not opposed to it. The knock on her door that came an hour later was different from Emmerich's. One knock, the weight of a single large hand. She opened the door. He was not in state clothes. He had not slept. She could see that, in the way she was beginning to be able to read the particular stillness that sat over his face when he was managing exhaustion. He held nothing. He looked at her for a moment in the way he had at the training yard, the first time, as if reading the actual fact of her, not the role. Brennan returned an hour ago, he said, from St. Emeric. She stepped back from the door. He came in. The will of Lord Edmund de Valcourt, the church copy kept at St. Emeric Cathedral, and signed by the bishop's notary, was 3 pages of careful Latin, with 2 witnesses marked. It was dated 4 years before Edmund's death, and it was, in the specific legal sense of the word, unambiguous. To my daughter, Isadora, who carries my name and her mother's eyes, I leave the whole of the Valcourt estate, the house, the silver workings at Gravine, and all goods and chattels therein. This is not conditional upon marriage, not dependent upon the maintenance of good standing with any noble house, not transferable by the decision of any guardian. Selim read it without expression. Then he set it down on the table beside her notes and looked at her. "What do you want?" he said. The real answer, not the legal argument. She had been asked this before, by Marguerite rhetorically, by Lucien never, by her own reflection, over and over in the low mirror of the manor's guest room. She had not been asked by someone who was going to listen to the answer and then act on it. My father's estate, returned and protected, she said. The false debts erased from record. Lucien not destroyed. He's 18 and he was used, but I want the record corrected. A pause. And I want to stop being moved. From house to house, contract to contract. I want. The word for it took a moment to surface. To stop being a piece in someone else's arrangement. He was quiet for a moment. The morning light was coming through the east window at a low angle, the particular flat gold of winter sun that contains no warmth but creates extraordinary clarity. The contract will be voided by the end of this week, he said. The council will issue a formal ruling. Marguerite will face a feudal tribunal in the south. I cannot predetermine its outcome, but I can make certain the evidence reaches it intact. A breath. The creditor record will be expunged. Lucien de Valcourt will be permitted to return home and manage the estate. Whether he does so with integrity is a slight, careful pause, a question only he can answer. I know, she said. About the other thing. He did not define it. He held her gaze with the same quality of steadiness he brought to everything, and the other thing named itself in the space between them without needing words. The remaining question, the larger one, the question of what came after the contract was voided, and the estate was returned, and the arrangement was undone. That is not mine to decide for you, he said. Not this time, not any time if I can help it. She looked at him for a long moment. That, she said quietly, is the right answer. 6 weeks made a particular kind of time. Not fast time, not slow time. The time of a legal process moving with the thorough, deliberate pace of institutions that understand their decisions will outlast the people making them. Brennan rode south 3 times. Father Emmerich wrote 11 depositions. Isadora gave testimony before the feudal council twice, both times in a room that smelled of old wood and political anxiety, both times in the flat, precise voice she had learned to use when precision was the only armor available. Marguerite did not contest the ruling. Isadora learned this not from an official announcement, but from Mireille, who had heard it from one of the household gods, who had heard it from Brennan, who appeared in the library doorway that evening and said simply, "It's done." 2 words that were in some way the inversion of the 2 words she had stood in a wardrobe and heard. Lucien found her in the library on the 5th week's last afternoon. He stood in the doorway for a moment before coming in, 17 years old, looking for once less like Marguerite's project and more like Lord Edmund's son. The same uncertain hands, the same habit of looking at the floor when he was about to say something that cost him. I knew, he said. He sat down without being asked, which was the first independent decision she had seen him make in weeks. He knew what she was planning. I didn't stop it. I told myself there was nothing I could do, but that wasn't I could do. He stopped, started again. That wasn't true. I could have told you. I could have. You could have, she said. He looked up. His eyes were wet. You were my sister, he said. My actual sister, and I know. I'm sorry. She looked at him. He was 18 years old, and he had been formed by something that had made smallness feel safe, and she was not certain he had the tools yet to be other than he had been taught. But he was here. He had said yes in the great hall when saying yes cost him something. He had come to find her, which he had not been required to do. Go home, she said. Manage the estate honestly. Be better than she made you. That is the apology I'll accept. He nodded. Once, quickly, the way children nod when they are trying not to cry. He left. She sat for a while in the quiet of the library, with the smell of old parchment and Emmerich ink and the low fire, and let herself feel the strange lightness of something resolved. Not happiness exactly. The absence of a weight she had carried so long, she had stopped noticing it as separate from herself. Seraphine left on a Tuesday, in the blue-grey light of early morning, before the household was fully awake. She found Isadora in the courtyard first, or Isadora found her, depending on which of them had intended to be there. They stood near the well in the cold air, both of them aware of the shape of the conversation they were about to have. "I still believe I would have been good at this," Seraphine said. No preamble. "I think you probably would have been," Isadora said. Seraphine looked at her with the careful assessment she had brought to everything, and something in it shifted, less guarded, more direct. "But it's not our decision." "No," Isadora said. "It's his. And he has made it." Not a question. A statement that contained, beneath the composure, beneath the careful management of expression, something that was simply the truth of loss, acknowledged without drama. Seraphine held her gaze for one more moment. Then she mounted and she rode, and the courtyard absorbed the sound of the hoofbeats, and then was quiet again. He did not ask. In the 6 weeks of legal process, in the long evenings in the library, in the occasional mornings when she came down to find him already at the table with his own papers, and the fire already built up, he did not ask. He was present in the way he had always been present, complete, without performance, not requiring anything from her that she did not offer. She brought him tea once. He looked at it, then at her, and said nothing, and drank it. He asked her opinion about a territory dispute in the 3rd week, genuinely asked, the kind of asking that meant he intended to consider the answer rather than use it as confirmation of a decision already made. She gave it. He argued back. She argued forward. He changed his position on one point and held the other and told her why, and she sat with the particular heat of intellectual engagement she had almost forgotten was possible with another person in the room. He quoted her argument in council the following day. Brennan told her this, with an expression that was trying very hard not to be a smile. She found him in the library on the evening of the 6th week's last day, sitting at the far end of the table with a document she did not recognize, a map of something, lines indicating territory, a quill turning his fingers with the absent motion of a person, thinking rather than working. She sat down, not at the near end, at the place across from him that had become, over 6 weeks, simply where she sat. "I have a question," she said. He set the quill down. "I have been here 6 weeks as yet." She searched for the right word. "As a case, a legal matter, as a problem to be solved." She looked at the table, then at him. "The problem is now solved. The contract is voided. The estate is returned. Marguerite has been dealt with." "Yes," he said. The word was careful, not the agreement of someone summarizing, but the stillness of someone waiting for what comes next. "I am not a case anymore," she said. "I am a person in this hold with a choice about what comes next. A breath. And I want to know, not what the council needs, not what the political situation requires, what you want, as a man, not a king." He was quiet for a long moment. "I want," he said finally, "to read in this library for the rest of my life, and have someone across this table argue with me about the things I read." A pause. "I want someone who does not need me to stand between her and the world. I want one." The slightest change in his expression, something beneath the architecture, something that had been there for 6 weeks and had not been permitted to surface. "I want you to stay because you have decided to, not for any other reason." She looked at him. "I would not accept any other reason," he said. "I know," she said. She picked up her pen and returned to her notes. He picked up the map. The fire burned steadily. Outside, the first bare suggestion of spring was in the air. The quality of the dark had changed, very slightly, towards something that was not yet warmth, but was the precursor to warmth. She did not decide that night. She sat with the deciding for 3 days, let it settle into her like water into stone, tested the shape of it against the shape of everything she had come through, and found on the 4th morning that it had already been decided, not in a single moment but in 100 small ones, in the candle lit without comment, in the 3 words spoken in a cold corridor, in the argument about a territory door, in the argument about a territory dispute, in the simple She went to find him. The great hall was smaller in spring than it had appeared in winter. Or perhaps it was simply that the light was different, the high east windows admitting a quality of sun that the low winter light had not permitted, and the light fell across the stone floor in wide pale columns and made the room look like what it was: a working place, a real place, a place where things were actually decided by actual people. Isadora stood in the center of it in a dress she had chosen herself. Deep blue, good wool, no ornamentation except the silver violet pin at her collar, moved there from her wrist on the morning she decided. Brennan was present. He stood near the door with the posture of a man who had stopped being skeptical approximately 3 weeks ago and had replaced the skepticism with something that functioned, awkwardly, as protectiveness. He did not look at her with doubt. He looked at her the way people look at things that have proven themselves. Mireia stood near the far wall with her hands clasped and her expression performing a stoicism that was not fooling anyone. Father Emmerich sat in the back row in his usual chair, spectacles on, hands folded on his knees, eyes closed, lips moving very slightly. Whether he was praying or reciting text was impossible to determine. Salem 410 stood at the front of the hall. He was in formal grey wool, the Vorthane seal at his shoulder, hair combed to the extent it permitted combing. He looked, in this light, in the spring light, with the snow gone from the courtyard and the mountains beginning to show their lower slopes in grey-green, like a man who had been carrying a particular weight for a very long time and was about to set part of it down. His eyes found her across the room. They were grey, iron grey, overcast grey, the grey of stone beneath river water in winter. They had been grey for 9 chapters, measured across 1,500 years of northern light. When she reached him and took his hands, they were warm, warmer than the air, warmer than the stone, the warmth of someone alive and certain. She felt his fingers close around hers, and then something she had not expected, a change. It was slow, not a flash, not a fire, but a slow illumination, like dawn arriving from below the horizon long before the sun becomes visible. The grey of his eyes deepened, shifted, and then, in the space of a held breath, they were not grey anymore. Gold. Not amber, not yellow, the deep, true gold of a thing becoming what it was always meant to be, of something held in potential for years and finally permitted to be itself. She held his gaze. "I choose this," she said. His hands tightened slightly around hers, not possessively, the way things are held that might be taken, but the way you hold something you cannot believe has arrived, with wonder before the holding becomes ordinary. "I know," he said. "That is the only way this was ever going to happen." Outside the high windows, above the black walls of Ironhold, above the granite face of the mountains, the sky was the particular unrepeatable blue of a northern spring morning, the blue that follows months of grey with a completeness that makes you understand for the first time what the grey was preparing you for. Later, when the hall had emptied and the household had returned to its ordinary business of keeping the fortress running, they stood at the east window of the library, the one that faced the mountains, the one she had looked out of on the first sleepless night. The snow was nearly gone from the lower slope. A narrow band of new green ran along the south-facing ridge, a color so bright against the gray rock it seemed almost impossible, the kind of color that requires winter to understand. "I kept it," she said. He looked down at her. "What?" She touched the violet pin at her collar. "My mother's pin. I left the dress. I left the estate and the name as it had been given to me, and everything Marguerite made of it. But I kept this." "Why?" "Because you have to remember the road," she said. "The length of it, the cold." He looked at the pin for a moment. Then he did not say anything at all, which was, she had learned, how he showed that he understood something fully. His hand moved, slowly, with the deliberate precision she recognized from the guard-room, from the library, from all the careful moments that had accumulated between them, and covered hers where it rested at her collar. Not a grasp, not a claim, just the weight and warmth of his palm over her hand, over the small silver pin, over the road it represented. She did not move her hand. Outside, the spring continued arriving, millimeter by millimeter, over the granite walls of Ironhold, without hurry, without fanfare, the way all the things that last come in. End 1.